So we're going to go sort of right into it in a minute. So good morning. I wanted to look at several issues that sort of are around Purim. I wanted to look at some artistic representations of Purim in the Megillah story over the last 2,000 years. I wanted to talk about the end of the book, which we actually don't talk about a lot. I wanted to talk perhaps about why it's such a celebration when the end of the book isn't necessarily such a great celebration. And if we have time, I actually have come across 4 alternative endings to the Megillah story. That's a lot in an hour. So we're probably not going to get everything, but I'm going to show you a link. And actually, let me send you the link. So much of what we're going to be doing, and if you take my Monday morning class, this is the source that I've been using the last couple of days. If you see it, there are about 30 different short videos, short meaning like somewhere between 10 and 20 minutes, that we're going to be looking at together, that we looked at together yesterday. Those who were in my class, and this is going to be sort of a jumping off point. But I wanted to see, do I have a reader? Anyone be a big reader for me so we can sort of start off together?
I'll read.
Thanks, Eileen. We're going to actually read from the Megillah a little bit and then sort of jump into our topics. So let me find what we want. Too much going on here. Let's just read this version. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes.
I gotta pull up a little bit. Here we go. Okay, we're reading chapter 9. This is towards the end. If you can read a little bit for me.
And so on the 13th day of the 12th month, that is the month of Adar, when the king's command and decree were to be executed, the very day on which the enemies of the Jews had expected to get them in their power, the opposite happened, and the Jews got their enemies in their power. You want me to continue?
Keep going.
Throughout the province of King Ahasuerus, the Jews mustered in their cities to attack those who sought their hurt, and no one could withstand them, for the fear of them had fallen upon all the peoples. Indeed, all the officials of the provinces, the satraps, the governors, the king's stewards, showed deference to the Jews because the fear of Mordecai had fallen upon them. For Mordecai was now powerful in the royal palace, and his fame was spreading through all the provinces. The man Mordecai was growing ever more powerful.
Now we're going to skip the sort of middle section of the heart of chapter 9, which is, do you know how many Persians were killed in the battle when the Jews won? Anyone know?
A lot.
A lot, yeah. A lot, yeah. I'm going to sort of just, right, we skipped this line where the Jews struck at their enemies with swords, slaying and destroying, wreaking havoc. Right here we have 500 here. These are all 10 of Haman's sons that are hung. And then we're going to read later, it's not just 500, but we're going to sort of cycle through. Got to get the spot.
One version or another says 75,000 altogether.
Yeah, 75,000. We didn't get there yet. It's later in the chapter. Yeah,
it is.
This is still the same chapter. Did I pass it? I may have passed it. But yeah, trust me, 75,000. Then I want to get to just, this is the last chapter. Eileen, if you can read for me, these are 3 lines or the end of the Megillah. Chapter 10 is just 3 verses.
Okay. King Ahasuerus imposed tribute on the mainland and the islands, and all his mighty and powerful acts and a full account of the greatness to which the king advanced Mordecai are recorded in the annals of the kings of Media and Persia. For Mordecai the Jew ranked next to King Ahasuerus and was highly regarded by the Jews and popular with the multitude of his brethren. He sought the good of his people and interceded for the welfare of all his kindred.
Okay, let's stop here. So we sort of skimmed through chapter 9 and we read the end of the Megillah chapter 10. Tell me if you could sort of summarize, tell me about the end of the book.
Massacre.
There's a massacre that happens, okay? Tell me about Mordecai's place. What's his
Right.
description?
He is the
Mordecai, go ahead,
second
Jerry.
to Achashverosh.
Second Hachashverosh, okay? What words are used to describe him? You remember?
Viceroy. The word of viceroy's in here, or something like.
Viceroy, yeah, but what adjective? Did you catch the adjectives? I don't know if you caught the adjectives.
Greatness of Mordecai,
Greatness, but there was something else.
great man among the
Eileen
Jews.
read in chapter 9, fear. Did you catch that section?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Chapter, right?
yeah.
There was a great fear of Mordecai, right? He was so powerful that they were afraid of him. That was chapter 9, and then it had all the battle scenes and the death and the hangings. And then chapter 10 was more positive, right? He was revered, right? In particular, it said he was revered by his brethren, was what our translation said, right? I guess that means the Jewish people.
Yeah, so it says,
And so the Persians feared him, and the Jews revered him. Interesting, right? What does this sound perhaps either like or what the opposite of?
It's always reminded me of Joseph.
Okay, right? There's definitely a Joseph here. How about in the Megillah story itself, right? Who tried to rise to power and tried to be feared?
Haman.
Yeah, right. So the whole theme of Purim is nehafachbo, of reversal, of turning things on their head, right? And this is the turning of Haman and Mordecai. And I wanted to this is going to be a multimedia presentation, hopefully. So I want to show you, there is a graphic novel Megillah story, if you can see my screen. This was published by JPS about 15 years ago. If you can see my screen, can you see this version? Do you see Mordecai and Esther here? This is the end of the graphic novel version, right? If you're going to describe Mordecai, how does Mordecai look? If you're just looking at this, what does the visual representation show you?
Looks regal.
Regal, right? Or in other words?
Powerful.
Yeah, I see a definite strength here, right? All right, what about Esther? Same thing? I mean, she's brandishing a sword.
swords.
This is like a pirate. You know that Captain Morgan rum commercial, right? She's literally standing like a conquering, whatever, right?
Well, those behind her
look like
also.
superheroes.
Yeah, there's
She
definitely
doesn't look like some little sweet lady like you think of her.
No.
100% not, right? Obviously, this is a interpretation by an artist, but I wanted to show you a couple. These are the last couple pages. So this is the page where she's revealed that she's Jewish and she's in the palace. And look what's behind her. A menorah, right? And I'll show you a couple more images if you can scroll through.
How many branches does that menorah have?
That was a
8.
Hanukkah. That was a Hanukkah menorah one. Right, this is this artist's version of the throne room, if you can see. Achashverosh, Esther, Mordecai's right there. And I got another sort of side view of Achashverosh above, and look at Mordecai here. Like a Jewish king or like some secondary thing. Really interesting.
More like an Egyptian.
There's definitely Egyptian as opposed to Persian. Again, this was an artistic representation. This was published in 2006, I think, by the Jewish Publication Society. So I wanted to sort of start us off as sort of an opening. And I wanted to listen to a couple of opening videos and teachings. And the first is by a professor named Adele Berlin, who's going to sort of set the scene for us. So let me pull it up. It's from that site that I showed you before. George said, put in the chat, Jewish Live. And hopefully you'll all be able to hear her. Sorry, let me just find it. There we go. Can you hear?
Yes.
Welcome to the Megillah Project.
One story, many angles.
Come learn with us.
I'm going to speak about the Book of Esther as comedy. The Book of Esther is the blueprint for Purim. It provides the reason to celebrate Purim and the guidelines for celebrating it. It says that Purim is to be celebrated with simcha umishpeh. That's an unusual phrase. The word simcha means joyfulness, festivity, and it is associated with other holidays in the Bible. But mishteh means drinking parties, implying frivolous fun, and it is not associated with any other holiday. Purim is indeed a different kind of holiday. It is carnivalesque. It features raucous behavior, drunkenness, noise-making, masquerades, Purim Torah, that's funny skits and jokes, and general revelry. The point I want to make here is that Esther is also a blueprint for Purim's carnival-like celebration, and not only because of its many drinking parties. The carnivalesque tone of Purim is built into the Book of Esther. The Book of Esther is a comedy, a bawdy farce. It has all the hallmarks of comedy: exaggerations, improbable events and actions, ludicrous situations, comic misunderstandings, sexual innuendos, and cartoon characters. Trigger warning, there are references to sex in this presentation. Let's begin with King Ahasuerus, the ruler of the great Persian Empire. He is hardly the model of the sovereign of the most powerful empire in the world. When we first meet him, he has invited all his courtiers and officials to a drinking party, men only, with a never-ending supply of wine that lasts for 6 months. Who is minding the empire? To make matters worse, he wants to show off his queen to these drunken men. So he invites Vashti to join them, something that was totally unacceptable, actually indecent in Persian society, where women held their own parties separate from the men. Only dancing girls attended men's parties. Poor Vashti is in a no-win situation. If she comes, it is an embarrassment to herself and the king. If she refuses, she is disobeying a royal command. She refuses, and the king gets very angry, but he doesn't know what to do. Since this king seems never able to act on his own, he consults his advisors. Ostensibly looking to protect the king's reputation and dignity, they overreact, making a mountain out of a molehill. They tell him that Vashti has disrespected not only the king, but the entire empire, and that he should dismiss her and find a new queen, and this is over the top, issue a new edict to be published throughout the land saying that every husband should maintain authority over his household. If there was anyone in the empire who did not already know about the king's faux pas, they would surely know about it now. A while later, when the king's anger had receded, he thinks about Vashti and the decree against her. Worried that he might change his mind and reinstate Vashti, the advisors jump in with another preposterous suggestion. Have a Miss Persia beauty contest and make the winner the next queen. Actually, this is more than a beauty contest. The king is going to audition each candidate for one night, and the one who pleases him the most will get the crown. Needless to say, no real Persian king ever selected a queen in this manner. Ahasuerus, of course, automatically accepts the advisor's suggestions, and all the eligible women are brought into the harem. The women are readied for their audition with extensive and expensive beauty treatments. If you thought that 6 months was an exaggerated length of time for a party, note that the women have 12 months of beauty treatments, 6 months of oil of myrrh, and 6 months of perfumes and women's cosmetics. Now let's consider Haman, perhaps the most comic villain in all of literature. Haman is also a caricature. He's an egomaniac, fixated on getting maximum honor. Whenever he thinks he's being honored, when he's personally invited to a private royal party, he is elated. But a rebuff of his honor, when Mordecai refuses to bow to him or even to acknowledge his presence, makes him angry and depressed. His wife and friends suggest a way to publicly disgrace Mordecai, put up a stake to hang Mordecai on. And here comes another exaggerated number. The stake will be 50 cubits high, equivalent to 75 feet, or a 7-story building. No building in the Bible is that tall. Solomon's temple is only 30 cubits high. Imagine hoisting a person up on such a high stake, and who could recognize him from below? Haman also has starring roles in the 2 comic misunderstandings that are the highlights of the book, and he is the butt of the joke in both. In the first, Haman misunderstands the king, and in the second, the king misunderstands Haman. The first misunderstanding is well known. Haman goes to the king in the middle of the night. He's so eager he can't wait till morning to get permission to hang Mordecai on the stake. The king is having a sleepless night, so he asked his servants to read to him from the annals, where he found that Mordecai had saved his life but had never been rewarded. As usual, Ahasuerus needs advice. How should Mordecai be rewarded? At that moment, Haman enters, and immediately the king blurts out, "What should be done for the man whom the king wants to honor?" Well, of course, Haman cannot imagine that anyone but himself would deserve to be honored. So he invents a ceremony that will give him the greatest possible honor. Let the honoree be positioned in the main square, wearing a royal garment that the king wears, mounted upon the royal horse that the king rides, and let a high-ranking courtier proclaim, "This is what is done for the person whom the king wants to honor." What you need to understand is that to wear the king's garment and to sit on the king's horse is tantamount to becoming the king. Haman has designs on the throne. He wants to appear in public as the king. Does Ahasuerus, we might wonder, understand the significance of this ceremony? But the king does not miss a beat. "Terrific idea, Haman," he says. "You can be the high courtier to bestow this honor upon Mordecai."
I want to stop here for a second. So Professor Berlin, who wrote by the way, she wrote the commentary, the JPS commentary for Megillat Esther, the Book of Esther. She continues on talking about the second sort of comic misunderstanding. One of my favorite shows growing up, I don't know, it may have already been in reruns, was Three's Company. And, every single episode basically had the same sort of comic misunderstanding, right? And usually some sexual innuendo was built into it also, right? And basically what Professor Berlin is saying, is many things, that we should understand that the Megillah is comedy and burlesque also. I don't know if you caught it. She calls it a burlesque. And they're caricatures of people, and it's sort of built around all these comic misunderstandings. And the second misunderstanding is when Haman realizes that sort of Esther's sort of going to get her way and save the Jewish people. He goes sort of into her room and begs for mercy. And he's sort of like falling upon her on the bed. And it's at that moment that Ahasuerus sort of walks in on them. And he's just sort of on his hands and knees begging. But the king sees it as a seduction scene, that Haman is putting himself upon her. And that actually leads to him getting hanged. So this is that second comic misunderstanding. So Richard Elliott Friedman, you might know him. He's a professor. We actually brought him in as a scholar in residence about 10 years ago. He wrote the book called Who Wrote the Bible? You might remember him. He has a video on this link also that you'll see. And the first 5 minutes, he does his own sort of comic thing that he calls the Book of Esther the dirtiest book in the Bible. He says it with a really funny British accent, by the way. And he says it's the dirtiest book in the Bible because of three things, right? It's dirty because it talks about politics. It's dirty because it talks about sex. And it's dirty because it talks about morality and immorality, right? So there are so many facets with which you can read this book of Megillah, which if you think about it, I don't know when your introduction to the book of Esther, the Megillah was, but for most people, it's sort of as children, right? And we present it as a children's story, right? And it's good over evil, and right, the Jewish people sort of overcoming tragedy and survival. Right? It's a diaspora story, sort of how we survive in the diaspora under non-Jewish authority, right? But it's often just this children's version, right? The Jewish princess that comes and saves the day, right? And there are so many different layers to the Megillah story. And if you listen to, you can go on that site and listen to the rest of Professor Berlin and Dr. Elliott, Richard Elliott Friedman, and the rest, and they'll sort of give you backgrounds to the literature. So I want to pause here for a second. Anything that Professor Berlin sort of said that sort of stuck out with you?
I mean, she made the point that this is historically inaccurate. So typically there's a reason why stories are manipulated, but I don't think she really explained why it would do it this way. So is that just a way that you can make a Jewish queen happen? So I'm just curious about that.
So right, great question. She does talk about it. There's about a 70-page introduction to her book, her edition of the JPS commentary, where she definitely talks very much about the historicity. There is no historic proof. Many other books of the Bible, either if you've been in my class on Mondays, we've been talking about archaeology lately, right? There's no archaeological proof of anything connected. We've never found anything. They think that perhaps Ahasuerus was either King Artaxerxes or King Xerxes. There were sort of Persian kings that we sort of, there's nothing that connected to the story, but if we're going to figure out a possible time frame, that's when they lived. But there is nothing in history that shows that there's been no sort of proof of this. So
you can say the same thing about the Exodus story. There's no archaeological proof of that either, or independent proof.
But there are different, though. There is archaeological proof that Jews lived in Egypt. Jews were in Egypt for a time period, and that's another class if you want. There actually are things. I taught the class a few years ago. Actually, the entire Mishkan structure, our Mishkan structure, is a Egyptian camp structure. Actually, it's the parshas that we're reading right now. So there are ways to read into the historicity. There have been archaeological findings along the way. We do have sort of some, and it's contemporaneous of the time that it would have come from. So, I mean, yes, we're like there. We don't know where the Sea of Reeds, and there's no evidence of the sea splitting, right? But there's different historicity with that, right? We've never really been able to date or locate the Book of Esther. That's a much, there's a deeper answer to that, but it's important to say, Rebecca. Thank you. Anything else that Professor Berlin brought up that was interesting to you? So I want to shift, if that's okay. So I want to cover a lot in this one span. So if it's okay with you, I actually want to go to a little bit of art and then hopefully go to the end of the book, that which Eileen started with. As I say, there are 4 alternative endings that I've sort of come across. So if we can sort of jump to a little bit of art history here. I want to sort of just watch the first 3 minutes of one of these videos and then sort of go through. I'm going to sort of just do a freeze frame of the art history that they show and for us to talk about it. Okay. Oh, I got
The
to stop
second,
her. Okay, here we go. Oh. Die Secunda, Purim in Persia's Shadow.
Welcome to the Megillah Project.
One story, many angles.
Come learn with us.
Purim is a Jewish holiday that's unique in many respects, but especially in its geography. Virtually all Jewish holidays celebrate events that took place either in the land of Israel, movement towards the land of Israel, or in some proximity to the land of Israel. And Purim is the quintessential diasporic holiday. It took place at a time after the destruction of the temple, where Jews lived in the diaspora. And it also has had special meaning for Jews who live in the diaspora around the world. There's a common practice of adding new Purims to celebrate events of salvation for Jews. And
are you aware of that? Did you know that throughout history, in particular in medieval times, if something miraculous happened, if there was like a pogrom happening to a city or to a country for Jews in Middle Ages, and there was some, they were saved from a pogrom, that actually the city or the town would announce a Purim, and they would actually celebrate something, a festival like Purim, and call it the Purim of, I'll look it up actually, I have notes on it, the Purim of whatever in that year. I'll find it for you.
Once again, Purim really speaks to the diasporic Jewish soul. It's about survival in the diaspora. It's about the threats of the diaspora. And it's about the relationship with God that remains in place even while in the diaspora. I want to think about how Purim not only is a diasporic holiday in its geography, but is particularly linked to a special place in the diaspora. And that, of course, is Persia. The events of Purim talk about Persian life, the Persian kingdom, even aspects of Persian culture, like Persian celebrations. But it also, the holiday also took shape within the context of Persia, even after the Book of Esther was composed. In fact, most of Jewish life, most of Jewish practice took place during a period known as Late Antiquity, which begins somewhere in the 3rd century of the Common Era and then extends to the 6th or 7th century of the Common Era, when Jews living under Persian rule, actually at the center of the Persian Empire in Babylonia, put together the Talmud, which is the center of Jewish life intellectually, and also dictates many aspects of Jewish thought and Jewish practice. So I thought it would be interesting to think about the role and the sense of this place, Persia, the place that it plays in the lives of Jews who lived in late antiquity, and particularly Jews who lived in proximity to or within the Persian Empire. In other words, what does it mean to celebrate a holiday like Purim in not only in the diaspora, which is the case for most Jews throughout Jewish history, but also in proximity to Persian power?
Oh, sorry. So I want to pause it there. So I don't know if you've thought about it like that, right? Every other Jewish holiday is either based in Israel or as a way of getting to Israel, right? Passover is the liberation to get to Israel, right? Shavuot, we get the Torah in order that we can journey to Israel, right? Hanukkah is in Israel. Sukkot is really focused, it's the season of, the agricultural season in Israel, right? Have you thought about the fact that this is the only holiday that's really based outside of Israel? The diaspora holiday for diaspora Jews. And as Professor Secunda said, right, that there is a rich Persian tradition. Not even, now we think about Iranian Jews, and the contribution of Iranian Jews over the last 100 years, right? But, but this is the place of the Talmud, right? And pretty important place in Jewish history. So you may remember Rabbi Weiss gave a sermon about this a few years ago, that there was a synagogue found it's actually technically in Syria, but archaeologists found in the last 100 years a preserved synagogue that had been buried for 1,700 years. It was just under rubble, and it was found, and the main sort of decoration of it was a painted synagogue. All the walls of the synagogue the inner walls were painted, and the main focus wall is a story of Purim. So I wanted to look at that wall and sort of take a deeper look into it. So I wanted to sort of jump into that and get the pictures.
Does that make sense time-wise? 1,700 years ago?
That was 300 years. Yeah, that synagogue was built in 300.
Okay.
BCE.
CE.
CE. So when did the Purim story supposedly occur time-wise?
300 BCE? We don't know. Yeah. We don't know the historical timing of it.
Okay.
So there's no connection to this land of Israel, and there's no mention of God.
The only connection to the land of Israel is that Mordechai was exiled. It says Mordechai was exiled, right, in the exile, and that he was from Jerusalem.
Okay. But no mention of God.
There is mention of God in the Septuagint versions.
Yeah, I taught about that yesterday.
Okay. Sorry, I missed your class.
In any case, that line about Mordecai being exiled seems to imply that the story takes place between the exile, 586, if you will, and the return some 30 odd years later. It's a short exile, relatively.
100, yeah. Yeah, unclear. Yeah, I think it's a little later than that, right? That would be like 400 something BCE. Yeah, I think it's a little later than that, but it is old. It is old. So I wanted to look at some art now too. We're sort of jumping around and doing different things, but
in the sense that
I gotta just stop. Okay. So I wanted to just play a little bit. This one, Mishael Tzion, Noam Sion's son, who's a great
Welcome to the
teacher and
Megillah
rabbi in his
Project.
own heart,
One
own
story,
way,
many
looks at some
Come
artistic
learn with us.
representations.
As a child, my favorite copy of Megillat Esther was one that Arthur Szyk drew in the 1950s. I used to look at it over and over for days on end as Purim came along. And hearing the Megillah, I would always be the first one to grab it so that I was the one from my family who was holding. One picture specifically in Arthur Szyk's glorious Megillah captured my imagination more.
Right, does everyone know Arthur Szyk, the famous Jewish artist?
No.
Have you seen the windows at the Temple to Tiferet Israel?
Yes.
No.
Right, I believe those are by Arthur Szyk.
Yes.
He's a world-renowned Jewish artist. Can you see this picture that I paused on the screen? Anything interesting to you?
Kind of gruesome looking with the guy hanging.
Yeah, very gruesome, right? Well, who do you think's hanging?
Oh, Haman.
Haman. Well, do you see anything interesting?
Well, the gallows isn't high enough.
Well, the gallows is definitely not 7 stories, right? What else?
Is that a mosque in the back?
It's at least Persian architecture, yeah.
And he's
Could
just,
be a mosque.
it looks like he's looking at the guy hanging and writing about it. I don't know.
Who do you think is the guy writing?
Mordecai.
Okay. Wearing a
Holding
beret.
a Hamantaschen.
Mordecai wore a beret.
Holding a Hamantaschen.
Holding a Hamantaschen, yeah.
He's very Contemporary looking.
Yeah. This is the artist himself. He drew himself into it, Arthur Schick. Arthur Schick, yeah, go ahead.
I said he's wearing glasses.
Yeah, he's wearing glasses. This is the artist drawing himself, right? He's contemporary, eating a hamantashen, which is, they probably didn't eat hamantashens back then in Persia.
And
right, that's not that ancient.
The paint that he's using, the ink or the paint.
Yeah, no, right. He's modern. He's a scribe. He's writing something like the Megillah. It's actually technically he's writing the bracha that's said afterwards. That's what he's writing here. This is the artist looking on. What you need to know about Arthur Schick is that he was an artist from before the Holocaust, living in Europe. He did make it to America before the Holocaust, but this is a drawing, or this is a Megillah that he illustrated after the Holocaust. Can you see my cursor? Can you see? Yes. Yeah. What's that?
Oh,
the swastika.
Yeah, the swastika.
Yeah.
All right. So he is envisioning Haman, right, as the ultimate evil, and he's placed on him the swastika, which is really powerful, right? So this is Arthur Schick, post-Holocaust, he didn't survive, he left Europe, but post-Holocaust, a Jew that made it out of Europe safely, right? Eating his hamantashen, celebrating in a Persian setting, right? Scribing, right? Wearing a short sleeve shirt and his beret, right? And seeing, being present as Haman is hanging.
He has a bunch of different colors of ink, and you wouldn't have had that.
Yeah, again, he's a modern artist. Yeah, so I want to.
The face of Haman looks so like a child, like innocent, not menace.
Yeah, it's really interesting.
It's an interesting tie-in also. There's a story, I don't know whether this is at the sentencing at Nuremberg trials or just before somebody is executed, but one of them, I can't remember which one, apparently some of his last words are something to the effect of Purim spiel.
Wow.
So the Nazis knew the story.
Wow. Yeah. So just for you to know we're not going to listen to all of Mishael Tzion's. I recommend it's only an 8-minute video. It's great. He talks about this is the version of the Megillah that he grew up with, and this is the image that is sort of seared into his memory. And I want to show you. He shows a couple other images.
More than anything, despite
let me just
its
get there.
gory.
Sorry. Just see if I can get it. Oh. Yeah, we're gonna get there. So yeah, sorry. This is the synagogue. This is that unearthed synagogue, right? That we talked about, the Syrian synagogue. These are the walls. This has been moved and reconstructed. I believe this is moved to a museum in perhaps London. I don't remember. But this is.
Is it Dura Europa?
Yes, this is Dura Europa. Yes. Yeah. I want to just start. I'm trying to get to. Okay, so this is Dura Europa. This is a colorized version, if you can see here. This is the old ancient Persian Syrian from 3rd century CE. These are 3 different panels, artistic representations of the Megillah. So what do we see there's 3. So this is part 1, this is part 2, and this is part 3. What do we see on this side?
Must be Haman leading Mordechai.
Haman leading Mordechai, right? Mordechai's wearing, does this look sort of royal robed-ish?
It's purple.
Right, royal robes. And do you know what Haman is dressed as right here?
Jester?
It's actually, this is Persian stable gear from the time period, right? So it makes sense, right? High Haman, who was still second to the king at this point, right, is wearing Persian stable gear, right, parading Mordechai through the city. If we go over here to this side, this is King Achashverosh. Notice the same robes, right? But this is Mordecai. This is Achashverosh wearing the same royal clothing. And who's this?
Esther.
Esther. What can you tell me in relationship to the king?
She's beneath him.
Are you sure?
No, it looks like
No.
she's above
No,
him.
she's higher.
Yeah, so she's either, yeah, to me, and actually in some of the videos, the art historians that talk, they actually, they're reading or seeing her as higher, actually elevated, even higher. And you can't see it here, but actually her crown is city walls. So like she was the queen for the whole palace. And here he's receiving a letter. There's a lot to really read in here. I'm sort of not doing it justice. Can you tell me what these people in the middle are dressed like?
Peasants.
Not
No?
It's not understood as peasants.
I realized that one of them is faceless, so I'm thinking that's something important.
That's just how it sort of was preserved.
Oh, okay.
I would think that they were government people.
Yeah, what are they wearing? If you were going to say, what type of clothing is it?
Togas, like the
It's
Romans.
a toga, right? So this is Greco-Roman, right? So in that time period already, this is sort of Greco-Roman times. If you think about 3rd century or 300s, right, that was high Roman time, right? So this either was some sort of acknowledgement of Roman authority, right, or the Roman people, right? This is who is Mordecai being paraded in front of, and it's not Persian people, interestingly, it's Greco-Romans, right, who were sort of the biggest ruling party around the time. So just an interesting statement about the time. I want to get to, I didn't make a time mark in my thing. Here we go. If you can see this picture here, it's a little hard to see. I talked about it. Arthur Schick, that artist who we saw before, that he showed us. This is the first Megillah that Arthur Schick illustrated. Here it's how would you describe this image? I know I can't blow it up. Sorry. Just tell me, like, what do you see? Like, is it?
It's a party.
It's a party. Yeah. No Nazi symbols, right? Colorful, right? Colorful, sort of a typical period piece. Again, very different. So this is pre-Holocaust for Schick versus post-Holocaust, right? Where you can really feel that sense of evil, and sort of overcoming of evil. So I just want to show you that sort of artistic representation as one thing. And just to show you, I'm going to just show you one timestamp on this. We're not going to watch the video. This is another art historian that gives a piece. And let me get to, if I can get to 1850. Can you see this? Okay, so these are 3 pieces that show a story in the Megillah. These 2 are illustrated Bibles, Christian illustrated Bibles, I think from the 1200s, if I'm correct. You can watch the video to get the exact time period. And this actually is a decorated wedding chest that was sort of like a buffet piece that a bride got, often depicted with some sort of historical scene. And for this bride chest, it was Italian in the Renaissance period. You can see people look Renaissance-y, if you can see. This is actually a picture of the story of the Megillah. So, just to show you, right, can you see this one on the top left? Do you see Mordecai sort of out at the palace gates? Mm-hmm. And, right, this is the king, right, this is the same image here. This is Queen Esther actually being given the crown. This is when the queen was chosen, right? Mordecai's here in the gates again. And here is everyone sort of wearing, do you see this is Mordecai here in this one? Do you see that? Mm-hmm. You see where my thing is? Right, again, sort of outside. Mordecai's on the outside. And again, everyone here is wearing, this is sort of high Renaissance dress. So again, if you're interested in art history, you can watch this video to get a sense of sort of some of the artistic representations over time. We saw already from 300. These are from 1200, 1500, and then we went into the 1900s with Schick. And then I showed you earlier, that recent graphic novel. So I just thought I want to show you some of the artistic representations of the Megillah. So now I want to jump to, if it's okay with you, the end of the book that Eileen read for us. And I want to just I got to just pull up one thing. Got to load one thing up for myself. Any comments, reactions, thoughts? No?
The title of that piece, the book or whatever you're showing, I got cut off, so I missed some things. It looked like it said, Haman the Hitler America or something like that. The title of that.
Yeah, I'll tell you 1 second. Yeah.
Okay.
If you want to watch, I put it in the chat. I'll put it in again. I gotta just load one thing up. Oh, okay, hold on. I gotta get back to you guys. This is all from something called Jewish Live, which is a Jewish resource, and they have something called the Megillah Project, and where they have these 30 videos. That was Misha Elzion's video talking about that is the Megillah, the illustrated Megillah that he grew up with. If you don't know Misha Elzion, he's a Jewish educator and a scholar. His father is Noam Sion, who actually spent some time in Cleveland teaching at what was the Siegel College, the Cleveland College of Jewish Studies, as a scholar in residence. And he's written, he wrote the Different Night Haggadah, and is an amazing Jewish educator and speaker. So I wanted to show you, now we're going to jump to what we began with, Eileen, and this is a little perhaps comedic, but this is a video about the end of the Megillah. So if you'll enjoy with me or share with me, let me put it up.
Good morning, class.
Good morning, Mrs.
Can you guys see this?
What are we learning about today?
Purim!
Cameras on, everyone. Purim is a story we retell every year, a joyous celebration of overcoming fear. Haman tried to kill us, but he lost and we're still here, inspiring generations with a tale we all can cheer.
But please don't talk about the massacre hidden at the end of the book.
Massacre? Did he say massacre?
You can skip right by it without even a second look. It's a bit too gory to conclude our story, so we just don't talk about what happens at the end of the book.
Miss Trevac, I have a question.
Shut up, Harold!
Please don't talk about the carnage hidden at the end of the tale.
Excuse me, could everyone please mute themselves?
Most Jews don't even know it that well. So, Haman's thriller is the end of our Megillah, because we just don't talk about what happens at the end of the book.
It's a story of perseverance, and to thine own self be true. It teaches glory, it teaches spirit,
It teaches do unto them before they do unto you.
Why not focus on the bravery and courage in our heroes of old? Mordechai, Esther, King Achashverosh. was all preemptive, call it self-defensive, and we just won't talk about what happens at the end of the book.
Okay. Am I right? Are they right? We don't really talk about the end of the book, do they?
I don't know. I think we actually do. And
do?
I don't think there's anything wrong with that, except it relates back to what we were talking about earlier. It's a kind of an exaggerated burlesque. Curiously enough, this is sort of precedes in time what the Christians would later have as their carnival. But the thing that's similar about it, and we had it first, I guess, is that it turns everything on its head. We're going to be killed. Woe is us. And then through a amazing deliverance, we'll call it a miraculous deliverance, we get to kill those who are going to kill us. So it's sort of representational. On the other hand, as anybody who's living post-Holocaust could say, don't say it's a story that ain't true. For better or worse, in the Purim story, we come off better because we don't get killed at all. In the more recent story, unfortunately, many got killed.
Except
Even though
I don't know if we'll
thank
have
God, was
time.
defeated.
Yeah, although I don't know if we'll have time, but I see Ruth just, as I said, I have 4 alternative endings I want to present to you. One of them is actually that, is that it actually comes back and bites us. Yeah, Ruth?
My mother-in-law, who was a Holocaust survivor, used to say, Haman was a tzaddik compared to Hitler.
Wow. Wow. Any other comment, any reactions to that video? Yeah, Rebecca?
Yeah, so our Chavara had a class with Lipsa Schachter 25 years ago, and she was the first one who really pointed that out, at least that I was aware of it. I don't like it. Becoming the killer is not the alternative that I prefer. I may be the only person that didn't love that part of Inglourious Bastards, which is the same idea. I don't want to become a murderer. That's not, I don't want to be murdered, but I also would prefer not to become a murderer. And it disturbs me. So, yeah.
I think if we read the story closer, and I don't know if this will help you, Rebecca, it actually, for the Jews to have ended up doing the killing they did, they still had to be attacked. If the attackers had said, well, Haman was a creep, maybe he was wrong, we're not going to do it after all, then we wouldn't have had to self-defend in that particular way.
Yes. No, I hear you. And she made the point. I really remember it was self-defense. But yeah.
And this is one of those other examples. I see you, Jackie. This is one of those other examples where we sort of point out, like, is this story really real? Is this like historically real? Like, could this really have happened? Did this really happen? I see Jackie, and then I see Susanna and Gina, and then Harriet. Jackie first.
I remember what Golda Meir said, that she didn't so much hate the Arabs because they were attacking the Jews. What she hated is they turned our people into killers.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, Susanna and Gina.
Well,
book club. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
On a different note, so two things. One, if you read the story that came with your Mishloach Manot that you will be getting the next couple of days, they kind of skip that ending.
Yes,
they exile Haman. They don't put that ending. So I thought I'd put that out there for those who like that. And this ending reminds me, very different, I know, but this week's Parsha wasn't our best moment either of killing a lot of people either. So kind of makes me think of that. Again, not really, well, a little related, but it's happened before.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, Harriet, and then Karen.
And I, again, Rabbi, obviously correct me, but my memory is that when the king sort of turns off Haman's decree that we're all going to be killed, he doesn't say that the Jews are saved. He just says that they're allowed to defend themselves, and then the decree goes. So I think that's huge. That is why it's not that the king said, okay, don't hurt the Jews. He just said that they were allowed to defend themselves. And then I guess in other classes, I've heard that sometimes it's going back to where Amalek's generations were not blotted out like they were commanded. But I think the fact that am I right that the king's decree was not to stop the slaughter of the Jews, but that they were going to be allowed to defend themselves.
The Persian king, sort of like the Egyptian king, Pharaoh, is considered like God and can never make a mistake, right? So a decree in the king's name is in perpetuity, can never be revoked or removed, right? So this was a secondary decree to sort of override, to correct. It was a corrective, but not worded as a corrective.
It's actually an implicit criticism of that kind of system, because you have a buffoon as the king who issues quixotic decrees based on whoever's giving him advice at the time. And yet that's how it has to play out. So very interesting in terms of literature.
Yeah. Karen?
The story that we read from book club, the Book of V, have you read it or heard of it?
No, but it's actually, the author is one of the people on the video on that website.
There's a completely different story. And in that one, I know it's a fiction, but it's another way of looking at it. Esther was not the little sweetheart she necessarily thought she was. And the king was a buffoon, and everybody easily directed him to what they wanted him to do. It wasn't like the story we always read where he and Esther live out in perpetuity. And
yeah. I'll give you the 4 alternative endings because we're already at 1 o'clock. So alternative ending 1 is, if you want to watch the video, Erica Brown, who's a great Jewish educator, commentator, teacher, she's one of the speakers. And towards the end of her presentation in those videos, if you want to watch her, she presents 3 alternative endings, which are all based on other biblical stories. So alternative ending 1 that she presents is a King David and Bathsheba, which is that Esther appeals to King Ahasuerus afterwards that the child that they had together, again, it's assuming they had a child, right, should succeed and take over the throne. But the king is intent, I guess, that he had a child with Vashti, and then Vashti's child is going to take over the throne. And there's this battle about who's going to be the next person. So that's alternative ending 1. Alternative ending 2 is the end of the Joseph saga and the beginning of slavery in Egypt, which is that, again, King Ahasuerus dies, right? His queen is Esther, but a new Persian king arises up, and he forgets everything that the Jewish people did, that Mordecai saved them, right? And Mordecai was second to the king, just as Joseph, and we talked about that Joseph thing, right? And the new Persian king, right, doesn't know the Jews, doesn't like the Jews, and begins a series of persecution against the Jews. That's sort of alternative ending 2. She has a third one also, but I wanted to present a different one, which I thought was really compelling. I forget her name. I got to look it up. But the author of a book called After Abel, which is biblical historical fiction, or what I would call modern day midrash, feminist modern day midrash, that takes 10 different stories of biblical female characters that don't have a lot about them, and it builds out a story about them. So this woman writes about Zeresh, Haman's wife, where there's only 2 lines in the entire book of Esther about her. And basically she just says Zeresh's wife. And if you remember, they have sort of side comments. And by the way, I grew up, she talks about in her video, and it's true, I grew up going to, the Megillah when Zeresh's name was mentioned, you would hiss. You'd say Zeresh, and then everyone would go, tss. So there's 2 reasons for the hissing. One is that it was an idea sort of like the women in a traditional Orthodox service, right? In a women's section, oftentimes there's a buzz and a hiss of women talking to each other. But I always thought about it sort of the snake-like side of Haman and his wife. And she actually built a whole story out, and I'm going to spoil it for you. It's beautiful what she wrote. I downloaded the book and bought it After Abel. It's on Kindle. And she actually reads a section. Do you want me to pull it up and do you want to listen to a 3-minute reading of her alternative ending?
No, I want to read the book.
You want to read the book. So I'm not going to tell you, but this is her alternative ending. There's nothing source-based on this. This is just her as a writer, as a fictional writer. But she believes that Zeresh was Vashti's sister. And that Vashti doesn't die, that Vashti is sort of excommunicated, and they still have a relationship, and then Zeresh pushing Haman to, and of course that Haman is also a buffoon, and every good, every man who makes it, there's a good woman behind him pushing him, right? That Zeresh is the one who keeps elevating Haman and steering him on the right way to sort of make his way up the ladder, but then Haman keeps sort of, doing himself in, and
She's Lady
following
Macbeth.
him. Yeah, so right, so it's Zeresh sort of weaving Haman's way up the ladder, right? But he keeps sort of falling down, and it's this tension of Zeresh and her banished sister Vashti, and sort of how their relationship is. It's a short story. It's only about 20 or 30 pages. I recommend it. It's in a collection called After Abel. I highly recommend it. So there's some really interesting sort of alternative endings. As we talked about sort of what's the ending, where are we going with this? So sort of to wrap up, now that we're 103, I know people have other commitments to go to. To me, number one, right, perhaps Esther is just a comedy. Right, this is a comedy and we need comedy. And I always remember there was a conversion student that I worked with that came from Asian heritage. And she always said this to me, that in Asian heritage growing up, both in her religion and culture, you were not allowed to laugh at yourself. That was considered like the worst thing that you could do is to laugh at yourself and to laugh at your culture and to laugh at your religion, right? You were mocking everything that was most important. And she loved the fact that in Jewish tradition, we had a day where it was all about sort of mocking ourselves, not taking ourselves seriously, taking a step back, right? I mean, we have Yom Kippur, we have very serious holidays, that are about introspection, about looking at ourselves, working on ourselves, how can we better ourselves? But we also have Purim, right? A day when we can just sort of let our hair down, right? And we can just laugh at everything that's happening, right? And we need that comedy. And the question is sort of now in this world that we're living in right now, what does that comedy mean? So that's sort of the first thing that I'm sort of thinking about. Right? The second is that there's these amazing artistic representations, and I only showed you a few of them, right? So I encourage you to sort of find artistic representations and take a look at what they mean and what that means about the authors or the illustrators that came up with it. And the third is that end of the book question, right? Are we good with the end of the book? Is it something that we can celebrate? Does it really lead us to celebration? Or does it sort of question like, why is that the end of our book? Or, what I didn't say is Eileen read it. Chapter 10 is only 3 verses. Did the rabbis intentionally or the Bible intentionally just have a 3-verse ending? And all was good and Mordecai was second, right? Right? And he was powerful. And all is good for the Jewish people? Or is there another chapter that didn't get included? And are these one of them? Or perhaps what do you think that next chapter is or was for the Jews? So I'll sort of be quiet. I know it's 1:05, so I'm open to comments, thoughts, ideas. And thanks for learning with me.
Sounds like a project for confirmation class someday. Have them write an ending or a new ending to
yeah, really.
Story.
That'd be great. Other ideas? All right, well, thank you for learning with me. I recommend taking a look at that Jewish Live Megillah project. They're really amazing, excellent videos. We looked at, 3 or 4 of them, just pieces, but there's a lot to learn and a lot to glean from. So I look forward to seeing you guys at the Megillah. Don't forget, we have an art class tomorrow at 5 o'clock with Marjorie Falk, if you want to do some mask making to prepare, and we'll see you at all the Megillah and all the things happening.